Good morning. Hello. My name is Andrew Doan. I'm Director of Security Products and Services at AWS. Thank you very much for taking your time to come and sit and listen to the panel. I've got three great guys with me today. All three are extensively using AWS. They have very large production services that they are running and providing using AWS. We've got Jason Chan from Netflix. You've probably seen him in some other presentations. We've got Khawaja Shams, who you probably saw in the keynote talking about the Mars lander and getting the video back here and streaming it live. And then I've got Rahul Sharma with Averail. He's, I think, recently launched something new at AWS that he might be talking about. We've got three very talented gentlemen here, and I was thinking, like, God, I really like to innovate. I like to create new products and services. And I was sitting here, like, wow, I've got these three guys here. What can we do with that? What could we go build? What would be some opportunities? And it was last night, and then it just hit me. There's just a service that's clearly looking for. Oh, and you guys don't even have the slides. That's kind of silly. And we're missing pictures too. Wonderful. Let's see if we get the next one. Okay. Maybe we can check to see if we can get the whole presentation up here. Either that, or I can switch it to the computer. Let me try doing that really fast here. I'll just do it that way. Sorry, guys.
It's a good graphic, too. I like that.
Can we just switch to the computer? I'll just do it from here. Yeah. Now it's set up. Can we just switch to the computer? Can we do that?
Oh. That might be audio. Oh. There we go.
Oh no.
Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. Anyway, so as I was saying, I was trying to think to my mind, what could we do? What product with these three talented gentlemen could we come up with? And then it just hit me. Clearly, the Martians on Mars need Netflix. and given the capabilities of the lander, video we can do live video one way. We can do it the other way, right?
Yeah, we could.
We can figure that out. We can figure out how to
absolutely.
make that happen. All right.
Problem that we are trying to solve, if Martians need to get to their documents back into their office, we'll let them
The Martians back in from Saturn.
their smartphones
All right.
and tablets along with them.
All right. We're gonna do the panel, and I've got some questions that I've pre-prepared that I think will strike some interesting conversation. We'll talk through those, but then towards the end we are going to go to audience Q&A. And when you get there, if you have got some questions for these guys, just raise your hand. I'll come find you. So with that, Jason, why don't just do a quick introduction, what your role is at Netflix, and
Sure.
how are you using AWS?
Sure, thanks, Andrew. I'm Jason Chan at Netflix, Cloud Security Architect. What I do is I manage a small team that's responsible for the overall security of our cloud deployment, which is basically the Netflix streaming service that you would interact with to watch video over the internet. Handle application and product security, systems and infrastructure, as well as operations.
I am Claude Shone. I lead a team of engineers at NASA Propulsion Laboratory responsible for highly available mission-critical applications and high-throughput, large-scale data processing and databases for operations of the Deep Space Network and dozens of NASA missions. I've been working very closely with cloud computing for the last 4 years. Been working with the security teams at JPL. We have Matt Durensky here, our security expert. And we've been working very closely with the AWS security team since 2008 to deliver secure and effective solutions to NASA.
Rahul?
Yeah, I'm Rahul Sharma, founder and VP engineering at Averail. I think we're less known than Netflix and NASA right now, but hopefully soon I think we would be a name everyone recognizes. So the problem that we are going after is like increasingly you have a lot of enterprise workers, especially in the field, carrying smartphones and tablets. And for productivity, they need access to documents that are back either in the enterprise, on-premise, or could be on the cloud storage. So employees want productivity, but at the same time, like if from the enterprise perspective, the requirements around compliance, regulatory stuff, security come in. So we are basically building a service that is hosted on AWS, acts as a security control plane that federates across multiple on-premise and off-premise repositories and content management systems, and enables employees to securely access, share, and collaborate with information that they want. Okay? We are a Series A funded company based out of Bay Area.
Great, thank you. Wow. Any more technical difficulties today?
You got a denial of service attack
Yeah.
here.
All right, I'll tell you what, I'll talk really loudly and hopefully we can figure this out. So, all right, so the first question is and I've got it up on the board there so you guys can see it. When developing your application to AWS, what were your areas of focus? And how have you utilized how have you utilized some of the security features of AWS, such as IAM and MFA and VPC, to build your architecture? And Jason, I'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah, I can provide a little background. We pretty much use all those. My team is responsible. We keep a pretty close eye on what the security features are of AWS. Pretty extensive users of IAM and VPC. So we focus on a lot of areas. I would say a couple of things that are probably relevant for the audience. So prior to being in the cloud, Netflix was hosted in the data center. It was kind of a traditional monolithic Java web application, kind of application stack, database stack. As we moved to the cloud, it basically became this sort of decomposed, highly distributed system, a lot of different network services communicating with each other, via REST interfaces. And sort of cryptography and encryption is a real key part of creating a secure distributed system. So one of the things that we did, and cryptography generally as security folks, we know it's not really a problem you want to let an individual developer solve. So as we created these individual services, we looked at key management and encryption as just another one of those services. So we put a lot of effort into creating our own kind of internal service that developers can use pretty easily. Another piece was just during the migration itself, just because when you're moving such a big service, you don't really just flip a switch and one day you're in the cloud. We focused a lot on being able to do bidirectional data replication between the cloud and the data center, accessing systems from the data center and the cloud and vice versa. I think looking back, we probably would have used VPC a little more extensively for that, but we do use it. That's one of our key VPC use cases now is getting access to data center resources.
Great.
So at JPL, we start by fundamental recognition of the fact that just because we put data in the cloud doesn't mean that it's public. There's a rich set of access control policies that are available to us. So we start by looking at the application and the data that is used for that application to determine the access control policies around it. And then we make extensive use of the IAM capabilities to enforce those policies. IAM has been allowing us to very succinctly express complex access control policies, and then we can rely on IAM team to enforce them for us. So for instance, if you have an S3 bucket with a couple of clicks and a couple of policies, you can create a very nice collaboration environment without having to write a single piece of code, right? And all of a sudden, scientists can drop in files in a particular location, and only their peers that we have allowed access to can see it, and things like that. On the other hand, we also are, as a government organization, we're geared towards incident response and forensic analysis, and we have found that VPC is a key enabler in forensic analysis in terms of if you've ever gotten a breach, or if you just want to log incoming or outgoing packets, you can do that with your NAT boxes on the VPC. You can also use, we make extensive uses of the elastic network interfaces to isolate instances in the event of an incident. So with elastic network interfaces, you can basically say, well, this machine is now in a subnet that only has access to my security inspector's console and nobody else. And this is effectively the equivalent of you coming in and taking the Ethernet cable off a computer. So the more we use VPC, the more we're actually realizing that the cloud environment is becoming a lot more like our internal environment, giving us the same set of controls that we had in the past.
Thank you, Khawaja. Rahul?
Yeah. So from our perspective, is unlike lots of services, we are a service that we offer to enterprises. So multiple enterprises would be our customers. And as I explained earlier, we are securing the content. Right? So unlike lots of services that try to bring documents into the cloud, like say a box or a Dropbox, we don't store the documents in our repository. We let them be at the source, right? And we are much more of a security control plane that enables secure access to that. So as we started looking at AWS, I think there are 3 areas that came up as top for us immediately, and then I'll try to map it to how we use different components of AWS to address that. Right? So the first one is security of data at rest and transit. Right? So data at rest, I think the fundamental thing you have to do is you really have to understand the data that you are going to model into your system. Right? Whether these are logs, whether it's customer data, whether it's something that you store, right? And then you have to partition it into whether you're going to store it on DynamoDB versus, say, RDS MySQL. Is it something that is transient into your stateless EC2 instances? So once you understand, then mapping them properly to each various facilities that are offered by AWS. So that's one of the key areas of focus for us. Now, the second problem has to do with, we are a service in the cloud, right? And we need to connect to on-premise resources, so whether these be Active Directory or these be SharePoint or shared drives and so on, so we can extract the metadata that resides in the cloud, right? And again, we have to make it work across multiple enterprises. And as you all know, enterprises don't come in one size and shape, right? There are enterprises small, medium that don't even have VPN gateways versus the other end of the spectrum that you have VPN gateways and so on. Right? So we heavily use VPC, both on our cloud, but we offer a range of solutions that are tied to VPC, VP, and tunnel that let us go from the cloud to our on-premise systems and so on. And the third part of the problem for us is we are a multi-tier application. So we have a web tier, we have an application server tier, then we have a database tier, we integrate with push notifications, we have asynchronous tier that pushes notifications to the devices and so on. Right? Now the important thing is and these are basically deployed across EC2 instances, across multiple availability zones and so on. So understanding as the data is going from one tier to other tier, what security controls you have to apply to make sure even going across the tiers within your service, the data is actually secure and so on. Right? So these were the 3 areas that we focused on early and heavily use IAM as well as VPC, plus even server-side encryption on S3 and so on. Right? So we really love what we do with AWS.
All right, thank you, Rahul. Next question. So we have quite a bit, an extensive compliance program at AWS. We're currently doing SOC 1 and 2, PCI, ISO 27001, just as an example. I'm curious how you've you've leveraged our program and our audits and our compliance program to meet your business requirements as it relates to compliance. And have you found the process accelerated by having AWS own the floor up to the hypervisor so that you can concentrate solely on your application for compliance? Jason?
Sure, yeah, I mean, definitely. I would say security is, I mean, I look at, the undifferentiated heavy lifting, that analogy applies as well. I mean, it certainly has helped us a lot. We're mostly in the cloud. The remaining bits that aren't are really our compliance infrastructure for SOX and PCI, and that will be, we're sort of in process of moving that now. But I know myself as a security person, having access to that kind of, the third-party attestations and that documentation has helped a lot. I mean, I've had conversations with our internal auditors and external auditors, and they also, are on board. I would say definitely, in my experience of working with cloud vendors, AWS is definitely leading in terms of third-party certifications and attestation. So it certainly helps us.
Great. Thank you. Khawaja?
The certifications that we're most excited about are the FISMA Moderate and ITAR certifications in GovCloud. We are working right now on getting an institutional authority to operate for the ITAR region, which is GovCloud, and we're excited because there's a lot of applications that we already deployed in the cloud. There's a lot more that are ITAR sensitive, and those are the ones that can actually use a lot of resources that are available in the cloud. So we're very excited about that.
Rahul?
So from our perspective, we see it as very much like principle of shared responsibility. Right? So as we sell to enterprises, the fact that Amazon has all the certifications and accreditations that actually helps us in the process of convincing the customer that it's okay for them to move certain part of their metadata into the cloud. A lot of times, I think when we go to IT side, we see some initial skepticism that, you're going to take my Active Directory information, or you're going to take some metadata out of my repositories into the cloud. Right? The moment we start explaining that at the infrastructure level, we're using a public cloud service that has all these security certifications done, it helps us in the process. Right? But at the same time, I think, again, the principle of shared responsibility, we see it as our responsibility to make sure that at application level, at our cloud service level, we do all the right things. As I mentioned earlier, like how we do encryption for data at rest, how we take care of security for data in transit, applying principles around like how we account for like cross-tier communication, VPC stuff, like creating the subnets and the routing tables using IAM. So we're doing lots of stuff around that, like at our application and cloud service level. Right? So I think it's like, again, shared responsibility across Amazon and us as the customer of AWS.
Okay, thank you. Moving on. So I imagine this question will have a lot of interest for those of you who are either in the beginning stages of building your applications or are ready to take that next leap. You've got an application running now, and now you're trying to scale it, maybe going to 5 or 10x. So our 3 panelists today all have very extensive architectures running on AWS, and I'm sure they've learned quite a bit along the way, things they would do differently in hindsight. So I'd like to maybe ask the 3 of you, if you were doing it again, what tricks, what lessons learned would you share with the audience here, and so hopefully they don't repeat. Jason?
Sure, I can start. I mean, so we started our migration in like 2008, 2009. So, I mean, if you saw the keynote yesterday, you saw the calendar with all the dots of the releases. So Amazon releases new features and services all the time. So, I mean, some of them weren't available when we were starting the migration, some of the IAM and cross-account access and VPC. So, I mean, certainly we would, if we were starting today, we would probably make much more extensive use of those. We have since, kind of retrofitted or added those on after the fact. I would say, I guess on the other side of that coin, the nice thing that has happened, it's sort of an after effect, is that going from that model of this sort of massive web app, Java web app that gets updated all at once in the data center to having this distributed system in the cloud, is we also changed our operational model, our deployment model. So we're doing many releases a day. We can innovate really quickly. But also, I mean, there's nobody saying that security can't be agile as well. And operating in the cloud and a cloud-based application allows that. So we deliver new features all the time, and it's the same thing for security. So being in the cloud allows us to deliver security much more effectively and much more quickly than previously.
All right. So actually, maybe just one follow-up question. As new features are released from AWS, obviously there's a process you have to weigh the pros and cons of taking advantage of whatever the new feature, but at the same time that's new work, right? And you know, sometimes it's common to take a position of you know, if it's not broken, don't fix it.
Sure.
Is there any ruler that you use when you're evaluating that?
Yeah, I mean, in general, our in sort of company stance is if Amazon can do it for us, we're going to let them. Actually, a perfect example from the security is if you follow it all, like IAM and EC2, you've heard of IAM roles for EC2, which is basically a way to deliver temporary credentials to instances. So before we had that available, I'm sure everybody in this room has had this problem of how do you get, if you have on-instance access to AWS resources, how do you securely get credentials there? So we actually built a system to do that, to actually deliver them. It was kind of, you know, bootstrap the instance, you know, contact a central system that would distribute keys. So that was basically kind of our solution. And it wasn't, you know, 100%, you know, it wasn't perfect, but as we saw roles kind of roll out, we said, no pun intended, but we said, hey, you know, this is, you know, Amazon is innovating. They're providing us a way of allowing us to sunset that service, and that's what we're in the process of now is we have roles in production, and we're looking at sunsetting our previous key management service.
Thank you. Khawaja?
I actually resonate really well with what Jason mentioned, is that cloud actually enables agility, even with security. The fact of the matter is that it's really easy in the cloud environment to replicate your production environment into a new environment and just test a new feature. So in retrospect, one of the features that we wished we did use more extensively is the VPC. When we first started, it was actually also around the same time, around 2008, with integration with the cloud computing. And when VPC first came out, it didn't have all the features that it does today. And many of the applications that are available, capabilities that are available in VPC today, weren't available then. And EC2 vanilla, as we used to call it, had all those capabilities that VPC did not have. Over the last 4 to 6 months, we've actually started noticing a trend where VPC is starting to get features that the vanilla EC2 does not have. So VPC allows you to dynamically define subnets, enforce access control lists on those subnets, but then also have things like elastic network interfaces that allow your machines to be across multiple subnets, allows you to monitor your packets in unprecedented ways that you just can't do in vanilla EC2. And in fact, you can, with the VPC, you can actually now get your own VPC without even having a VPN tunnel using Internet Gateway. So all of these innovations have now been put in place to get us to a point where everything we're doing really needs to be in VPC. So one of the goals that we have in the organization moving forward is VPC everything. We need to put every application that we have inside the VPC wherever we possibly can, and then identify the areas that we can't put inside the VPC. It also gives Matt here a lot more visibility into our infrastructure and a lot more control into the environments. Second feature that we wished we used more extensively was we started using main credentials with open policies across some of our applications, and that wasn't actually a very good idea. And some of our applications are deployed with credentials that are actually a little too open. And with the token service that IAM has introduced now, we can actually create temporary tokens for each of the applications so that we don't have to distribute any tokens, and two, we can generate temporary credentials and hand them to the application rather than having to worry about expiration of credentials and rotations and things like that. So VPC and more extensive use of IAM is what we wish we did differently.
Thank you very much. Rahul?
Yeah, so from our perspective, as we started architecting our system, I think one of the fundamental goal for us is we always assumed that we would be big, right? So you have to account for lots of those things early into the architecture, right? So one of the things is in terms of our insights, it's the classical debate between PaaS and IaaS, right? We like Elastic Beanstalk. So early we realized that I think we wanted to use VPC and IAM, but Elastic Beanstalk didn't have support for that till recently, right? So we had to actually drop down to EC2 level, starting doing custom AMIs, then started using VPC as well as IAM. Right? So again, when you look at the security from the perspective of the underlying platform, so you have to really understand like what level of controls you want versus like how much you can delegate to the platform. So that's a trade-off I think you need to be aware very early in, as you design your architecture as well as like as you start implementing. Right? The second thing was, I think it's like, so as you start building, you would have dev, test, staging, production environment. Right? You'll have multiple people using those environments. Right? So this is where we absolutely like the fact that we have IAM in there, right? Because you don't want to proliferate your credentials and all of that, or your secrets and the keys into the instances. Right? So initially, like we were not using IAM, but then we started using IAM. Now we are heavily centered around IAM. Right? And the third thing is, I already mentioned, it's like it's not one size fit kind of a solution. Like initially we thought VPC, VPN tunneling would be answer to every enterprise integration scenario, but then we ended up doing like multiple types of scenarios there. So VPC for one end of customer, inside-out proxy that we developed ourselves on top of AWS that gets deployed onto the enterprise infrastructure to come inside out without letting the enterprises open up any ports or configuring anything on their VPN gateway. And then even using OpenVPN kind of a host-to-host VPN for accessing on-premise resources. Right? So a lot of these things, like as we started building, these came up early in our discussions on the architecture, and since then we have been implementing. Right? But my fundamental thing would still be like always architect and implement as if you would be very successful, because these you never ever get the chance to go back and say, we thought small, and then these problems come to bite you later in the cycle.
Okay, thank you. So I've got one last question, but then we'll go into audience Q&A. So I frequently hear from customers when I'm talking, security obviously is a focal point, it's a concern. There are a set of customers, however, that have expressed to me that they believe their environment in AWS is in fact more secure than their on-prem. And part of that is because that we have very specific access points, either via the APIs or the management console. Every action is authenticated. We know exactly who that person was, and particularly in the case of IAM, you can get down to very specific users and roles. So my question: we've talked quite a bit about IAM and some of the other questions, but specifically before IAM came out, my sense is that there's still several people here in the room who are not using IAM today, and after the conference and hearing so much about IAM, our hope and desire is that you are going to go and look at IAM extensively and start taking advantage of it. When you were going through that process, how did you approach it? How did you to separate your users and roles, and how did you take advantage of IAM? Jason?
Sure. Yeah, we take a fairly straightforward approach. I mean, we use kind of a role-based approach. We have basically, three groups of IAM sort of entities. I kind of equate to some degree roles and users as the same sort of thing, and then group separately. So we have like when people need to access the console, and for the most part, we do everything through APIs or kind of creating our own tools. But if you want to get access to some things like account activity, you will need to log in. And so there are a few people who need to access the management console. So we do use IAM for actual users with MFA. Then we have the problem of the on-instance access to AWS resources. So you have EC2, you need to access SQS or SNS or anything else. And as I mentioned before, we had previously built a key management system that delivered those credentials, those sort of long-term persistent credentials. Those are also IAM accounts. So those are basically what we try to do is profile as best we can what kind of access to services an instance will need, and then deliver an IAM credential that has those rights. And then, so as we move more to roles, we'll switch more of that. We'll keep the same policy, but we'll have that kind of temporal nature of the credentials. And then the third set is really our tooling that, to some degree, is based in the data center, like Asgard, which is our open source sort of orchestration platform, and other like Bastion hosts and things like that that need to access APIs. We'll provision, again, reduced rights, IAM accounts that can do that access. And we'll also tend to attach policies to there where they have the kind of IP-based restrictions on where those accounts can be used from.
Great, thank you. And Khawaja, I'm dying to know, is there a Martian or an aliens group in IAM?
Not yet. We keep them away from our infrastructure. The cloud can actually be a lot more secure than our internal infrastructure due to many reasons. One of the fundamental differences between cloud computing and traditional infrastructure is the transparency that it provides you and your IT security team. With a single API call, your IT security team can get a list of all of the images that are running. With a single API call, they can find out which ports are open and which security groups are. And with a single API call, they can plug holes when there's a vulnerability that has been exposed without interfering with the application. With that said, IAM does allow us to express very complex policies. And one of the things that we've found actually missing is we use IAM extensively for providing access to SQS, SNS, SWF, and S3, and things like that. But on-instance access is difficult for us, which means that once you create an instance and you have that you want to provide somebody with credentials to log into that instance, you still have to tie that back into your internal infrastructure and provide a key, an SSH key for the person to be able to log in. We kind of wish that existed so that we don't have to do that management. But other than that, we're using IAM today for all kinds of things. So for instance, we have created S3 buckets where particular people have access to particular parts of the bucket, and we would hand those keys to the end users while minimizing their access. We have workflows that are basically pipeline oriented. So one team will produce one type of set of data, and then another team will want to process that data. So in this particular scenario, we'll give that team write access to the bucket, but not read access. And the other team will come in and read the data from that the first team has written, and then write it to their next bucket, and so on. And you can create a very nice pipeline where you can actually control the sanctity of your infrastructure by just using the IAM credentials as well. Lastly, we use IAM for minimizing accidents. So if you're using things like Bucket Explorer or exploring your buckets or SimpleDB viewers and things like that, you don't want to be able to accidentally drop a domain or delete a bucket and things like that. So we use IAM credentials with very minimalistic permissions when we're using these tools, so we don't accidentally make any mistakes. And it's the equivalent of SUing into root, right? So if you want to do something extensive like delete a bucket or delete versions, you actually change the credentials you're using, and then you make the actions very consciously that, hey, I'm in dangerous territory.
Thank you. Rahul?
So from our perspective, I think similar problems as what Khawaja and Jason described. Like, so we have multiple environments, dev, test, staging, prod, obviously multiple users. So we want to make sure that at least the prod environment, like nothing untoward happens there. So we use IAM to manage the users and the corresponding permissions on what they can do. So specifically, like say a test engineer would have rights or permissions to do anything on the test environment, but not so on the production environment and so on. We also use multi-factor authentication. Like I have my phone, I have the authenticator right here. And I think this is, the two factors actually help there. Right? I think the other problem we use IAM to solve is the proliferation of the keys and the secrets. Right? I think, like as Dr. Vogel said in the keynote, like anytime you're doing SSH and you're trying to configure something, I think you're not doing the things right. Right? So for us, IAM, like setting up role instances, proper credentials and permissions with those. So we use IAM for that. And increasingly, I think like everything for us is getting centered around IAM in terms of managing user roles, permissions, authentication into AWS console, or even to do certain actions on like various AWS resources.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, it's your turn, audience QA. If you have a question for the panelists, just raise your hand, I'll come around.